They built their entire psychological architecture to prevent this exact situation. Every defense mechanism, every withdrawal pattern, every strategy for maintaining emotional distance, every carefully constructed wall around their heart, all of it designed with singular purpose to make sure they never loved anyone enough that losing them would hurt. The avoidance entire system, constructed meticulously over decades starting in childhood, was engineered to keep love manageable, controllable, shallow enough that walking away wouldn't create real pain. They were supposed to stay defended enough that no one could reach the vulnerable core. They were supposed to maintain sufficient distance that emotional entanglement never became so deep that extraction would be costly. They were supposed to choose people who wouldn't see them fully, wouldn't love them completely, wouldn't create the safety where their real self might emerge. They were supposed to leave before feelings got too deep, to withdraw before attachment became too strong, to protect themselves before vulnerability became too dangerous. This was the plan. This was the defensive structure that kept them safe through countless relationships, where they remained essentially untouched beneath their defended exterior. But then you happened, and everything that was supposed to prevent this love from developing failed. Somehow, you got past defenses that were supposed to be impenetrable. Somehow, you created safety where they were supposed to remain guarded. Somehow you saw the real person they worked so hard to hide and loved what you saw instead of being repelled by it. Somehow, attachment formed despite all their unconscious strategies to prevent attachment from forming. Somehow, they dropped their guard in ways they never dropped their guard, shared parts of themselves they never share, felt things they've spent their life preventing themselves from feeling, and now they love you. Actually love you. Not the shallow, manageable version of love their defensive system allows, but deep, consuming, vulnerable love that was never supposed to happen according to every protective strategy they've relied on since childhood taught them that needing people is dangerous. The love they feel for you violates every rule their defensive system operates by. It contradicts the core belief that they're safer alone. It creates the exact vulnerability they've structured their entire life around avoiding. It makes them depend on someone when their whole identity is built on not depending on anyone. It gives you power to hurt them when their entire psychological project has been eliminating anyone's power to hurt them. This love was never supposed to happen, but it did happen. And now the avoidant is trapped in an impossible situation where they love you in ways their defensive system cannot accommodate, cannot manage, cannot allow them to fully act on. They love you, but the love creates terror because it represents complete failure of every defense they've depended on, complete breakdown of the system that was supposed to keep them safe, complete vulnerability to exactly the kind of pain they've spent their life ensuring they'd never experience again. The love is real. The love is deep. The love is exactly what they never wanted to feel, because feeling it means they're no longer safe, no longer in control, no longer protected by the defenses that defined who they believed themselves to be. And they cannot make the love go away. They've tried, but they also cannot fully surrender to it, because surrendering would require dismantling every protection they've ever built. So they exist in impossible space between love that happened despite all defenses and terror that prevents them from honoring that love, between feeling something profound and being unable to act on what they feel, between wanting you completely and being too defended to keep you. The love was never supposed to happen. Understanding why it happened anyway, what it means that it happened, and why it still might not be enough to overcome their defenses, helps you see the tragedy of loving an avoidant. Not that they don't love you back, but that they love you in ways their entire system was built to prevent, and they're trapped by that love. In crisis, their defenses cannot resolve. Why their defensive system was built specifically to prevent love like this from ever developing. The avoidance defenses aren't random. They're specific architecture designed to protect against specific threat. Understanding what they were protecting against helps you see why your love represents everything they were trying to avoid. The childhood wound taught them that depending on someone creates pain when they're inevitably unavailable. So the entire system was built to ensure dependency never develops. The avoidance core wound comes from childhood experience of needing caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, rejecting, or absent. The child needed. The need went unmet. The unmet need created profound pain. This sequence, need, disappointment, pain, repeated enough times that the child's developing psyche drew conclusion. Needing people is dangerous. Depending on anyone creates vulnerability to pain I cannot control. The solution is to stop needing. The defensive system that developed was specifically designed to prevent dependency from ever developing again. They learned to meet their own needs. They learned to be self-sufficient. They learned to structure their psychology so that they genuinely didn't need emotional support or connection or care from others. This system worked. It protected them through childhood and adolescence and early adulthood. They maintained independence that prevented the pain of unmet needs. But your love activated the need they thought they'd eliminated. They need your emotional support. They need your care. They need the connection you provide. Dependency developed, despite all defenses designed to prevent it. And now, they're experiencing the exact vulnerability the system was built to avoid. They depend on you, which means losing you would hurt, which is precisely what the entire defensive architecture was constructed to prevent from ever being possible again. They constructed identity around being person who doesn't need anyone. And genuine love threatens that identity by revealing the need beneath the constructed self-sufficiency. The avoidant doesn't just avoid dependency behaviorally. They build entire identity around not needing. I'm independent. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need anyone. I'm fine alone. This identity isn't just how they behave. It's who they believe they are. It's their core sense of self. It's what makes them feel valuable and strong and different from people they perceive as weak or needy. The identity was built to protect against the vulnerability of need, but over time the identity became who they are, rather than just defense mechanism they use. Your love threatens this identity fundamentally, because they love you, and loving you means needing you, and needing you contradicts the core identity they've built their entire self-concept around. They cannot integrate I need her with I'm someone who doesn't need anyone. The statements cannot both be true. Either they maintain the identity and suppress the love, or they acknowledge the love and dismantle the identity. Both options feel like death. Death of the love or death of the self. The love was never supposed to create this impossible choice. The defenses were supposed to prevent anyone from mattering enough that choosing them would require choosing against the defended identity. The defensive system maintained control through being able to leave. But loving you this deeply means leaving would cost more than the system can afford, while still maintaining its purpose. The avoidance sense of safety has always come from knowing they can leave. If relationship becomes uncomfortable, if someone wants too much, if vulnerability feels too threatening, they can leave. They maintain control through this exit option. Knowing they can leave makes staying tolerable, because staying is choice that can be reversed rather than trap they're stuck in. But loving you this deeply changes the calculation. They can still leave physically, but leaving would cost them something essential now, would create pain the defensive system was built to prevent, would result in loss that contradicts the system's purpose of protecting them from loss-based pain. The exit option still exists behaviorally, but no longer exists psychologically. Using it would defeat the entire purpose of having defensive system in the first place, because the pain of leaving you would be worse than the pain the system was protecting against. They're trapped, not by external constraint, but by their own feelings. The love makes leaving unbearable, which makes them feel trapped, which activates all their fears about being controlled or losing themselves, which makes them want to leave, which would hurt unbearably. The circular trap is what the defensive system was supposed to prevent by never allowing love to develop this deeply. But the love developed anyway, and now the system's primary tool, the ability to leave without cost, has been eliminated by feelings that make leaving too costly to use. They were supposed to choose people they could keep at distance, but something about you made distance impossible despite all their usual strategies for maintaining it. The avoidant typically chooses partners who can be kept at distance, people who won't push for deep intimacy, people who accept surface-level connection, people who won't see beneath the defended exterior, people who allow the avoidant to maintain control over intimacy levels through withdrawal and engagement. These relationships work for the defensive system because they provide companionship without threatening the defenses, connection without requiring vulnerability, relationship without risking the core self. But with you, distance didn't work the way it usually works. You weren't satisfied with surface level. You wanted to actually know them. You created safety, where their real self emerged even when they were trying to keep it hidden. You saw through their defenses in ways that made the defenses ineffective. You generated intimacy almost despite their resistance to intimacy. This shouldn't have been possible. The defensive strategies have worked with everyone else. But with you, every attempt to maintain distance somehow resulted in more closeness. Every withdrawal somehow deepened rather than severed connection. Every defense somehow became transparent rather than protective. The love developed because you were the wrong person, wrong for their defensive system, wrong for their strategy of keeping people at manageable distance, wrong for their need to control intimacy levels. You were right for their deeper self, but completely wrong for their defended self. And the defended self strategies failed to keep you at safe distance, which is how the love that was never supposed to happen ended up happening anyway. The system was designed to make them the one who leaves, never the one who's left. But loving you gives you power to leave them, which reverses the power dynamic their safety depends on. The avoidant maintains safety through being the one with power in relationship dynamic. They're the one who withdraws. They're the one who controls distance. They're the one who could leave if they chose to. This power position protects them from abandonment. You can't be abandoned if you're the one creating the distance. But loving you this deeply shifts the power. Because they love you, you have power to hurt them by leaving. You have ability to create the abandonment their entire system was built to prevent. They're no longer in the powerful position. They're in the vulnerable position of being the one who could be left. This reversal was never supposed to happen. The defensive system was supposed to ensure they always maintained superior position, always had more power, always cared less, so they'd always be safer. But they love you more than you might love them at this point, care more deeply than their defended position should allow, need you in ways that give you power over them. The power reversal is intolerable to the defensive system because it creates exact vulnerability the system was designed to prevent. They're now the one who stands to lose more, the one who would hurt more, the one who's dependent. Everything their defenses were supposed to prevent. The specific ways the love developed, despite all their defenses and what this reveals. The avoidant fell in love with you, despite every protective mechanism being deployed against that exact outcome. Understanding how the love developed, anyway, reveals what was unique about you that overwhelmed defenses that usually work effectively. You created safety without demanding vulnerability, allowing them to lower defenses voluntarily rather than feeling pressured to drop them. Most people who want intimacy with avoidance make fundamental mistake. They demand vulnerability, pressure for openness, push for the defenses to come down. This pressure activates the avoidance defenses maximally because pressure feels like control, and control is what they're defending against. But you approach differently. You created safe environment through your consistency, through your acceptance, through your lack of judgment, without demanding they be vulnerable in that environment. You made space for vulnerability without requiring it. And in that space, something happened their defenses weren't calibrated for. They chose to be vulnerable, not because you pressured them, not because relationship rules demanded it, but because the safety you created made the defended position feel unnecessary in moments. They lowered defenses voluntarily, which bypassed the defensive response to pressure. By the time they realized they'd been vulnerable with you in ways they're not vulnerable with others, attachment had already formed. The love developed because you didn't try to make it develop. You just created conditions where their real self could emerge, and when real self emerged and was accepted, love was inevitable consequence. You saw through their performance without punishing them for performing, recognizing the defended exterior as protection rather than as who they actually are. The avoidant performs. They present defended version of themselves to the world. Most people relate to the performance, either believing it's who the avoidant actually is, or being frustrated by it and criticizing the avoidant for not being real. Both responses reinforce the defense. Believing the performance means the real self stays hidden. Criticizing the performance means the real self is even more unsafe to reveal. But you saw through the performance. You recognized it as defense. You understood there was real person beneath it. And crucially, you didn't punish them for having the defense. You didn't criticize them for performing. You didn't demand they drop the protection immediately. You just gently related to the person you sensed beneath the performance while accepting that the performance was necessary for them currently. This recognition without punishment created something the avoidant rarely experiences. They felt seen without feeling exposed, understood without feeling vulnerable, known without feeling unsafe. Being seen this way, being recognized for who they actually are, while being accepted for needing protection, created bond their defenses weren't designed to prevent, because the bond formed with their real self, not with their defended self. The defended self couldn't protect against connection that was happening at level beneath the defense. Your consistency proved you wouldn't abandon them even when they withdrew, which slowly convinced the defended part that maybe dependency wouldn't lead to inevitable pain. The avoidance system assumes that depending on someone leads to pain because people are unreliable. This assumption is based on childhood experience and is reinforced by adult relationships where the avoidance patterns, withdrawal, testing, pushing away, cause people to eventually leave. But you stayed. They withdrew, and you didn't abandon them. They pushed you away, and you didn't retaliate by leaving. They tested you repeatedly, and you remained consistent. This consistency created problem for their defensive system. The core assumption that depending on someone leads to pain when they're inevitably unavailable was being challenged by evidence that you weren't inevitably unavailable. You were reliably available. The defensive system's prediction that you'd eventually abandon them wasn't coming true. And as this became increasingly clear through your sustained consistency, the defended part's certainty about dependency being dangerous started eroding, not completely, not enough to dismantle the defense, but enough that love could develop in the space created by your consistency, proving the core assumption partially wrong. The love wasn't supposed to develop because people aren't supposed to be consistently available, but you were, and your consistency created crack in the defensive certainty that allowed love to slip through. You loved them in their totality, including their wounds and their defenses, rather than loving the potential version you hoped they'd become. The avoidant is accustomed to conditional love. People love them as long as they meet expectations. People love the defended version, but would reject the wounded version. People love the potential they see and are disappointed by the reality. This conditional love confirms the defensive belief that their real self is unlovable, that they must maintain performance to be accepted. But you loved differently. You loved their actual self, including the parts they're ashamed of. You loved them with their wounds, with their defenses, with their patterns, with their limitations. You didn't love them for their potential. You loved them for what they actually were. This unconditional quality of love, love that doesn't require them to be different to deserve it, was something their defensive system wasn't designed to process. They've never experienced this before. And experiencing it created vulnerability the defense couldn't prevent because the vulnerability wasn't created by pressure or demand. It was created by acceptance. They could be fully themselves with you and still be loved. This realization broke something open in them that all their defenses couldn't keep closed. The love developed because you loved what their defensive system assumed was unlovable, and being loved that way made the defended position feel less necessary, even though the defended part was terrified of what loving you back would mean. Something in your energy or your essence resonated with their deepest self, creating recognition beyond conscious choice that they'd found something rare that their wounds had made them believe doesn't exist. Beyond all the specific things you did or didn't do, something fundamental about who you are resonated with who they are at their core, not who they perform being, not who their defenses present, but who they actually are beneath all protection. There was recognition, soul-level recognition, that this person understands me in ways I'm not usually understood, sees me in ways I'm not usually seen, accepts me in ways I've never been accepted. This recognition happened at level beneath conscious awareness, beneath defensive control. It wasn't choice. It wasn't something they decided. It was automatic response of their deepest self, encountering your deepest self and recognizing kinship, safety, home. The defensive system has no protection against this kind of recognition because it happens at level the defenses don't control. And once that recognition occurred, love was inevitable regardless of what their defended part wanted. Their true self found its match in your true self. And true self doesn't defend, doesn't withdraw, doesn't maintain distance. True self just loves. The love that was never supposed to happen developed because beneath all their defenses, their true self encountered yours and said yes to what it found, and that yes cannot be undone by defensive strategies designed to protect against conscious choices about relationship. This yes was deeper than choice, and deeper than choice means deeper than defense. Why loving you creates impossible crisis. The avoidant cannot resolve through their usual defensive strategies. The love that developed, despite defenses, creates specific crisis because the avoidant cannot make the love go away, but also cannot fully surrender to it. Understanding the crisis helps you see why they're trapped and why the trap might not resolve in your favor. They cannot eliminate the love through their usual defensive strategies because the love came from deeper place than the defenses protect. The avoidant has strategies for eliminating unwanted feelings: distraction, devaluation, rationalization, withdrawal. These strategies work on feelings that develop at surface level, feelings that are based on conscious choice or on surface attraction or on needs the defensive system recognizes and can manage. But love for you didn't develop at surface level. It came from their true self encountering yours. It came from being seen and accepted in ways their wounded self desperately needed. It came from dependency that formed before the defensive system registered the threat. The love is beneath the defenses, deeper than the protective strategies can reach. So the usual defensive tools don't work. They've tried to eliminate the love, and they can't, because the love isn't at the level the defenses operate at. This creates first part of crisis. They're feeling something they cannot make themselves stop feeling, which means they've lost control, which is exactly what their entire defensive system was designed to prevent. They cannot fully surrender to the love, because surrendering would require dismantling defenses that feel like their only protection against being destroyed by loss. The obvious solution would be to surrender to the love, accept it, act on it, build relationship based on it. But surrendering to love, this deep, would require dropping the defenses that have protected them since childhood, would require depending on you completely, would require trusting that you won't leave or hurt them or become unavailable, would require vulnerability at level they've never sustained, and their defensive system interprets this level of vulnerability as threat to survival. The defenses don't feel optional. They feel like the only thing preventing catastrophic pain. Dropping them to surrender to love feels like removing the only protection they have and standing completely naked and exposed before someone who could destroy them. Intellectually, they might know you won't destroy them, but their nervous system, programmed by childhood wounds, cannot trust this. The defenses scream that surrendering to this love will result in the exact pain the defenses were built to prevent. So they cannot surrender even though they love you, cannot fully commit even though they want to, cannot let themselves be as vulnerable as the love requires, because the terror of what could happen if they're fully vulnerable and you leave is greater than their capacity to tolerate. The love makes them feel trapped between equally impossible choices: stay and face unbearable vulnerability, or leave and face unbearable loss. The crisis intensifies because every choice feels impossible. If they stay with you, if they try to build relationship based on this love, they have to sustain vulnerability that feels intolerable, have to maintain openness that triggers all their wounds, have to depend on you in ways that create terror of abandonment daily. The relationship itself becomes source of constant anxiety because being in it requires them to remain in exactly the vulnerable position their entire life has been organized around avoiding. But if they leave you, if they end the relationship to escape the vulnerability, they face loss of the person they love, pain of losing the connection that's deeper than any connection they've experienced, grief of walking away from the one person who saw them fully and loved them anyway. Leaving feels as unbearable as staying. The trap is that both options create intolerable pain. Stay and live in constant terror of vulnerability. Leave and live in constant pain of loss. Neither option allows them to return to the defended, comfortable position that existed before they loved you. The love has made the defended position impossible to fully inhabit, whether they stay or leave. Their identity as independent person who doesn't need anyone is being destroyed by loving someone this much, creating existential crisis about who they are if they are not the defended self. The avoidant sense of self has been, I'm the independent one. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need anyone the way other people need others. This identity gave them pride, gave them sense of being different and stronger, gave them coherent narrative about who they are. But loving you contradicts this identity completely. They need you. They're not self-sufficient anymore. They're dependent in ways that look exactly like the dependency they've always looked down on in others. The identity is collapsing, And beneath that identity is question they've never had to answer. If I'm not the independent defended person, who am I? What's left when the defense is stripped away? This existential question is terrifying because they've never developed sense of self separate from the defense. The defended identity is the only identity they have. Loving you is destroying that identity, but isn't automatically providing new identity to replace it. They're in liminal space where old self is dying, but new self hasn't been born. And living in this liminal space while the love persists creates crisis of identity that the avoidant has no tools to resolve. They want to be with you, but their nervous system treats sustained intimacy with you as threat, creating biological level response they cannot override through conscious choice. Even when they consciously want to be with you, even when they've decided to try, even when they're attempting to sustain the relationship, their nervous system betrays the conscious intention. Sustained intimacy triggers fear response. Closeness activates panic. Emotional availability creates feeling of suffocation, even when they want to be available. These aren't conscious choices. These are automatic nervous system responses programmed by decades of defensive adaptation. And you cannot override your nervous system through willpower. They want to stay present with you, and their body responds as if staying present is dangerous. Heart racing, chest tightening, feeling of needing to escape, even when they don't want to escape. They consciously love you, while their biology treats loving you as threat. This split between conscious desire and biological response creates suffering. The avoidant cannot resolve through trying harder or wanting it more. The crisis exists at level beneath conscious control, and resolving it would require nervous system reprogramming that happens through years of therapy, not through love alone, no matter how genuine the love is. What the love that was never supposed to happen actually means, and why it still might not be enough. The avoidant loving you, despite every defense being designed to prevent it, means something significant. But understanding what it means and what it doesn't mean protects you from false hope, while honoring the reality of what exists between you. Their loving you proves you're genuinely special. Not everyone breaks through avoidant defenses, and the fact that you did confirms you offered something rare that their deeper self recognized as essential. Throughout relationship and after it ended, you might have doubted whether you were special to them, whether what you offered mattered, whether the connection was real or just in your imagination. Their loving you despite all defenses designed to prevent love confirms you were genuinely special. The defenses work with most people. The strategies for maintaining distance succeed with almost everyone. But they didn't work with you. You broke through in ways that shouldn't have been possible, given how defended they are. This proves you weren't generic. You weren't replaceable. You weren't just another person they dated. You were the person who reached their true self beneath all protection. The person their deeper self recognized as worth the risk, despite every learned pattern saying risk is too dangerous. You being special isn't about your ego. It's about accurate understanding of what happened. The avoidant loves you in ways they don't love others, in ways their defensive system was specifically designed to prevent. This only happens with genuinely rare connection. The love, being real, doesn't mean they're capable of sustaining relationship. Feelings and capacity remain separate things regardless of how deep the feelings are. They love you. The love is real and deep and unlike anything they've felt before. This is true and simultaneously true. They may be completely incapable of sustaining relationship with you. The love doesn't create capacity. Capacity requires developed nervous system tolerance for vulnerability, ability to stay present during conflict, skill in emotional regulation, willingness to choose relationship over defense when the two conflict. These capacities are built through sustained therapeutic work, through practice, through rewiring patterns that took decades to establish. Love doesn't automatically confer these capacities. They can love you desperately while being completely unable to show up consistently. Can love you deeply while being unable to maintain emotional availability. Can love you genuinely while their patterns destroy the relationship anyway. The love is real. The incapacity is equally real. Both exist simultaneously. Understanding this prevents you from believing that their love, however genuine, is sufficient foundation for functional relationship without the capacity work that makes love sustainable. Their loving you was never supposed to happen, but did happen, which reveals the defenses aren't as complete as they believed, suggesting possibility of transformation, but not guaranteeing it. The significance of the love breaking through their defenses is that it proves the defenses aren't impenetrable, proves their true self still exists beneath the defended exterior, proves they're capable of feeling things they thought they'd successfully eliminated the capacity to feel. This is meaningful because it shows transformation is theoretically possible. If they can love you despite all defenses, maybe they can learn to sustain intimacy despite all wounds. Maybe they can develop capacity despite decades of defended adaptation. Maybe their true self can grow strong enough to override the defensive system. This possibility is real, but possibility isn't probability. Most avoidants who love someone deeply still don't do the work required to become capable of sustaining that love. The love proves capacity exists somewhere beneath the defense. It doesn't prove they'll access that capacity, develop it, sustain it long enough to build functional relationship. The possibility of transformation is real. The likelihood of transformation without years of sustained therapeutic work is low. You cannot make yourself less lovable to relieve their crisis. The love happened beyond both of your control, and trying to undo it serves neither of you. You might feel some responsibility for their crisis. If you were less yourself, less consistent, less accepting, maybe they wouldn't love you and wouldn't be suffering this impossible conflict. But you cannot make yourself less lovable to solve their problem. The love happened because of who you genuinely are. Trying to be less yourself doesn't help them. It just deprives them of the genuine connection their deeper self recognized as essential, and it certainly doesn't help you. It requires you to diminish yourself, to manage someone else's inability to handle what you naturally are. The love was never supposed to happen, but it did happen, and neither of you can undo it by trying to be different. The love is what it is. The crisis is theirs to resolve through doing their own work. You remaining fully yourself, offering the genuine connection their true self recognized, is not causing their crisis. Their defensive system being unable to accommodate their own genuine feelings is causing their crisis. Don't diminish yourself trying to resolve crisis that's theirs to manage. The most important question isn't whether they love you. It's whether they'll choose to do the work required to become capable of sustaining the love. They love you. This is established. The question that actually matters is different. Will they do sustained difficult therapeutic work required to become person who can sustain this love? Will they commit to years of addressing attachment wounds, developing nervous system tolerance, building emotional regulation capacity, learning to stay present through discomfort? Will they choose the relationship over the defense when the two conflict? Will they prioritize becoming capable over remaining defended? These are the questions that determine outcome. Their love for you is real, but insufficient without the work. If they do the work, genuinely, sustainedly, for years, then the love that wasn't supposed to happen could become foundation for relationship that actually works. If they don't do the work, the love just becomes source of suffering for both of you. Them loving someone they cannot sustain relationship with. you loving someone who cannot show up for the love they feel. The love existing is beginning. The work is what determines whether the beginning leads anywhere. What they're loving you, despite their defenses, means for your healing and your decisions. The avoidant loving you in ways that were never supposed to happen creates specific implications for you. Understanding these helps you navigate the complexity without losing yourself to false hope. Knowing they genuinely love you eliminates one source of pain. You weren't unloved or unlovable, weren't too much or too demanding. Throughout relationship and after, you carried specific pain. Maybe they didn't love you. Maybe you weren't enough to deserve their love. Maybe your needs made you unlovable. Knowing they actually do love you, that the love is real and developed despite all their defenses working to prevent it, eliminates this pain. You were loved. You are lovable. Your needs weren't the problem. You weren't too much. The problem was never your inadequacy. The problem was their incapacity. This knowledge serves your healing by removing the self-doubt that loving avoidance typically creates. You can release the question of whether you are enough. You are always enough. The love proves it. They loved you despite every defense designed to prevent them from loving anyone. That's how enough you were. Their love, without capacity, creates different pain. Knowing they feel deeply, but cannot act on what they feel, which is perhaps more cruel than if they felt nothing. But knowing they love you, while being unable to sustain relationship, creates different pain. The pain of being loved by someone who cannot show up for their love. The pain of their feelings being genuine, but meaningless in terms of actual partnership. The pain of knowing their love exists, but changes nothing about the outcome. This pain is harder in some ways than believing they didn't love you. If they didn't love you, leaving makes simple sense. Why stay with someone who doesn't love you? But they do love you. And still leaving might be necessary because love, without capacity, just creates suffering without resolution. This is perhaps crueler reality, being genuinely loved by someone who genuinely cannot build with you. The love existing makes everything more painful, not less, when the love cannot translate into functional relationship. You cannot wait for their love to transform into capacity. Capacity must be built through their work, on their timeline, for their reasons. They love you. Knowing this might create temptation to wait, to give them time, to believe the love will eventually motivate the work. But you cannot wait for transformation that may never come. Their capacity isn't built by your waiting. It's built through their sustained therapeutic work that happens on timeline you cannot control, and that they must choose for their own reasons, not to get you back. If you wait, you're sacrificing your life to someone else's potential transformation. If they do the work, they'll do it whether you wait or not. If they don't do the work, your waiting just means you wasted time. You could have been healing and building with someone capable. The love they feel is theirs to manage. Your life is yours to build. These exist separately. Their love for you doesn't create obligation for you to put your life on hold while they potentially work on themselves. The love being real, but the relationship being unsustainable, both can be true, and accepting both simultaneously is what allows you to move forward without bitterness. They love you genuinely. The relationship cannot work without their doing transformative work they may never do. Both statements are true. Holding both simultaneously is mature acceptance of complex reality. You don't have to decide they didn't really love you to justify leaving. You don't have to pretend the love was insufficient or fake. The love was real. The relationship was still unsustainable. Both are true. This acceptance allows you to honor what was real between you while still choosing to move forward, because what was real wasn't enough to build on without the capacity work they haven't done. You can hold love for them while building life without them, can acknowledge their love for you while refusing to return to a relationship that harmed you, can grieve what could have been while accepting what actually is. This both and rather than either or is what allows healing without bitterness. The most powerful response to being loved by someone who cannot sustain relationship is building life so fulfilling that whether they eventually develop capacity becomes irrelevant to your well-being. They love you. This love was never supposed to happen. It happened anyway, and it might destroy them internally while changing nothing externally about their capacity. The most powerful thing you can do with this knowledge is build life so extraordinary that their internal state becomes background noise to your thriving. They can love you while you build career that fulfills you. They can struggle with their crisis while you develop relationships that nourish you. They can work on themselves or not work on themselves while you become increasingly yourself in ways that don't require their transformation. Their love exists in their world. Your thriving exists in yours. These are separate realities that don't need to intersect. Honor that they love you and build life anyway. Build life that doesn't wait for them. Build life that doesn't need them to become capable. Build life where someone else's love, however genuine, isn't required for your joy. That's freedom. That's power. That's what you deserve. The avoidant loves you, but this love was never supposed to happen. Every defense was designed to prevent exactly this outcome. Every strategy for maintaining distance failed. Every protective mechanism proved insufficient against the connection your true self created with theirs. They love you in ways that violate every rule their defensive system operates by. And the love creates crisis they cannot resolve, cannot eliminate the feelings, but cannot fully surrender to them either, cannot stay without unbearable vulnerability, and cannot leave without unbearable loss. The love is real. The love proves you were special, proves the connection was genuine, proves you reached parts of them no one else has reached. And the love might still not be enough, might not motivate the years of work required to build capacity, might not overcome the defenses that are stronger than the love, despite the love breaking through initially. They love you. They cannot sustain you. Both are true. Both will remain true unless they do transformative work that most avoidants never do. Honor that they love you. It matters. It's meaningful. It validates everything you felt. And then build life that doesn't require their love to be acted upon, doesn't wait for their capacity to develop, doesn't organize around whether the love that was never supposed to happen eventually becomes love that can sustain itself. They love you. You're worthy of that love, and you're equally worthy of being loved by someone whose love doesn't require them to dismantle their entire defensive structure to show up for you. That person exists. That person's love will feel easy rather than impossible. And easy, surprisingly, beautifully, powerfully easy, is what you've earned after loving someone for whom loving you created a crisis their entire psychological system was built to prevent.